The stagecoach rattled into Guthrie, Oklahoma on a blistering afternoon in July of 1893, carrying Catherine Cole and a secret that weighed heavier than all her worldly possessions combined. She pressed her gloved hand against the worn leather seat as the wheels clattered over the rutted Main Street, raising clouds of red dust that seemed to swallow the whole world in a hazy shimmer. Through the window, she could see weathered storefronts and wooden sidewalks, men in dusty hats pausing their conversations to watch the stage roll past. And somewhere in this frontier town waited a man she had never met, but had agreed to marry through carefully worded letters exchanged over 6 long months. Catherine was 22 years old, dark-haired and green-eyed, with a determination in her jaw that had served her well through harder times than most women her age had known. Back in Philadelphia, her world had collapsed when her father's business failed and he died shortly after, leaving her mother bedridden and their debts mounting like snowdrifts in a winter storm. Her uncle had offered a solution, though she had not understood at the time what kind of solution it truly was. He would pay her mother's medical expenses and clear the debts, he said, but Catherine must come west and marry a business associate of his, a rancher named Vernon Walsh, who needed a wife and had the money to make such arrangements. She had written to Gabriel Stone instead, a cowboy whose advertisement in the matrimonial newspaper had caught her eye with its honest simplicity. He sought a wife for companionship and partnership, someone willing to work hard and build a life together on the Oklahoma frontier. His letters had been thoughtful and kind, speaking of the land he was saving to buy, the horses he broke and trained, the future he hoped to create. She had fallen a little bit in love with the man in those letters, with his earnest dreams and his gentle humor that shone through even in written words. But she had not told him about Vernon Walsh. She had not explained that her uncle considered her already promised, already bought and paid for like a piece of property transferred between business ledgers. The shame of it had kept her silent, and the hope that perhaps she could simply arrive, marry Gabriel quickly, and present her uncle with a fait accompli that even his money and influence could not undo. The stagecoach jerked to a halt outside the depot, and Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs. The driver called out their arrival, and she gathered her carpetbag and small trunk, smoothing her travel-worn dress with trembling hands. The afternoon sun hit her like a physical blow when she stepped down, the heat so different from the humid summers she had known back east. Everything smelled of dust and horses and something wild she could not name. "Miss Cole." A voice spoke behind her, deep and slightly rough, and she turned to find a man standing a respectful distance away, hat in his hands. He was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and dark blonde hair that needed a trim, falling slightly into eyes that were the color of a clear prairie sky. He wore dusty work clothes and scuffed boots, and there was a gentleness in his face that made something in Catherine's chest ease and tighten all at once. "Mr. Stone?" she asked, and her voice came out smaller than she intended. He smiled, and it transformed his face, chasing away the uncertainty that had lingered around his mouth. "Gabriel, please. I am mighty glad you came. I was not entirely sure you would, if I am being honest." "I gave my word," Catherine said, and then felt foolish because of course he knew that he had been there at the depot waiting, had clearly believed enough to come. "I mean, I wanted to come. Your letters were very kind." "They were honest," Gabriel said, and there was something in his voice that made her look at him more closely. "I figured if we were going to build something together, it should start with truth. Can I help you with your things?" She let him take her trunk, and they walked together down the wooden sidewalk toward what he explained was a boarding house where she could take a room for propriety's sake, until they were married. The Reverend could perform the ceremony in 2 days, he explained, as soon as the waiting period was satisfied. He had arranged everything with a careful consideration that made Catherine feel both grateful and guilty in equal measure. The boarding house was run by a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Patterson, who looked Catherine over with sharp eyes but seemed satisfied by whatever she saw. Gabriel carried the trunk up to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor, setting it down carefully, and then standing awkwardly near the door, turning his hat in his hands. "I know this is all strange," he said quietly. "Meeting like this, making such big decisions based on letters and hope. But I want you to know that I meant everything I wrote. I am working on the Stratton Ranch right now, saving every penny I can. In another year, maybe less, I will have enough to buy my own place. It will not be fancy at first, but it will be ours, built on honest work and partnership. That is, if you still want that after you have had a chance to see what life here is really like." Catherine looked at him standing there in the doorway, this man who had written to her about dreams and partnership rather than duty and obligation, and felt the weight of her deception like a stone in her stomach. "Gabriel, I need to tell you something." He waited, his blue eyes steady and patient, and she almost could not bear it. But before she could force the words out, Mrs. Patterson's voice called up the stairs that there was a visitor asking for Miss Cole, and Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. "Are you expecting someone?" Gabriel asked, concern creasing his brow. "I do not know," Catherine lied, but she knew with terrible certainty who had come. Her uncle must have sent word ahead, or perhaps Vernon Walsh himself had arrived to claim what he considered already his. They went down the stairs together, and in the front parlor stood a man Catherine had never seen before but recognized instantly from her uncle's descriptions. Vernon Walsh was perhaps 45 years old, well dressed in a suit that looked expensive and out of place in this frontier town, with slicked-back dark hair and a thick mustache. His eyes were hard as they landed on Catherine, assessing her like livestock at market. "Miss Cole," he said, not asking, stating, "I am Vernon Walsh. Your uncle sent a telegram ahead of your arrival. I trust your journey was not too arduous." Gabriel had gone very still beside her, and Catherine could feel the tension radiating from him. "Mr. Walsh," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "I was not expecting you. No." His eyebrows rose slightly. "That is strange, considering our arrangement. Your uncle was quite clear about the terms. I have held up my end, paid all the debts, arranged for your mother's care. Surely you did not think you could simply run off and avoid your obligations." "Obligations?" Gabriel's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. "Catherine, what is he talking about?" The room felt too small, too hot, and Catherine could not seem to draw a full breath. This was the moment she had dreaded, the truth she had tried to outrun. "My uncle made an arrangement," she said, forcing herself to meet Gabriel's eyes even though she wanted to look anywhere else. "When my father died, he left debts. My mother was ill, needed care. My uncle offered to help, but the condition was that I would marry Mr. Walsh. He is a business associate, and apparently I was part of some larger deal between them." She watched Gabriel's face, saw the confusion and hurt flicker across it, followed by something harder. "And you did not think to mention this in your letters, in any of our correspondence over 6 months?" "I thought I could escape it," Catherine said, and her voice broke slightly. "I thought if I came here, if we married quickly, my uncle could not force the issue. I did not want to be sold like property. I wanted to choose my own life, my own husband. I wanted you." "Touching," Vernon Walsh said dryly, "but legally irrelevant. Your uncle is your guardian until you marry, and he has given his consent for you to marry me, not this cowboy. The contracts are signed. The The money has changed hands. You are mine, Miss Cole, whether you accept that gracefully or not." Gabriel moved then, stepping slightly in front of Catherine in a gesture that was protective without being possessive. "I do not think you understand how things work out here, Mr. Walsh. This is not some Eastern drawing room where you can buy and sell people according to contracts. Catherine is her own person, and if she does not want to marry you, then she does not have to." "The law says otherwise," Vernon replied coldly. "Her uncle is her legal guardian and the marriage contract is binding." "Were you asked or told?" Gabriel said suddenly, turning to look at Catherine directly. His blue eyes were intense, searching hers. "When your uncle made this arrangement, were you asked if this was what you wanted, or were you told this was what would happen?" Catherine felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "I was told. He said it was the only way to save my mother, to clear the debts. He said I had no choice." Gabriel nodded slowly, then turned back to Vernon Walsh. "Then there is no arrangement as far as I am concerned. Whatever deal you made with her uncle, it is between the two of you. Catherine owes you nothing." "The law disagrees," Vernon said, and there was a threat underlying his smooth tone now. "I have the documents. I have witnesses. If Miss Cole refuses to honor the agreement, I will not only withdraw all financial support for her mother, but I will sue for breach of contract. Her uncle will be ruined, her mother will be thrown into the street with no care, and Miss Cole herself will be legally compelled to fulfill her obligations. I suggest you step aside, Cowboy, before you make this worse for everyone." Catherine felt the floor tilting beneath her feet. Everything Vernon said was true. She knew that, had known it from the moment her uncle first explained the situation. She had been foolish to think she could escape, selfish to involve Gabriel in a situation that could only hurt him. "Gabriel," she said softly, touching his arm. "He is right. I have to go with him." "No." Gabriel's voice was flat, absolute. "You do not. My mother will be cared for. We will figure something out." He was still looking at Vernon Walsh, and there was something in his expression that made the older man take a step back despite himself. "I think you should leave now, Mr. Walsh. Catherine needs time to think, to rest from her journey. If you want to discuss this further, you can do so through proper legal channels, not by showing up and making threats." "I am not leaving without what belongs to me," Vernon said, but his hand moved toward his coat pocket, and Gabriel moved faster than Catherine would have thought possible, catching the man's wrist before he could draw whatever weapon he carried. "I would not do that," Gabriel said quietly. "Mr. Patterson, the deputy, lives right next door, and I imagine he would be very interested to hear about a man threatening a young woman and trying to draw a gun in a public establishment. Self-defense laws are fairly straightforward here in Oklahoma territory. A man has a right to protect himself and those who cannot protect themselves." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other, and Catherine held her breath. Then Vernon jerked his hand free, smoothing his coat with exaggerated care. "This is not finished," he said coldly. "The law is on my side, and I have resources you cannot imagine. You are making a grave mistake, Mr. Stone, and you are condemning this foolish girl to consequences far worse than a comfortable marriage would have been." He left without another word, and the silence he left behind felt heavier than the Oklahoma heat. Mrs. Patterson, who had been standing in the doorway to the kitchen throughout the exchange, shook her head and retreated, giving them privacy. Catherine found herself shaking, whether from anger or fear or relief she could not quite say. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I should have told you. I should have been honest from the beginning." Gabriel turned to face her, and his expression was complicated, hurt and anger mixed with something that might have been understanding. "Yes, you should have. I told you in my very first letter that I wanted to build something on truth and partnership. How can we have that if you are keeping secrets like this? I know, you are right. I just thought," she broke off, wrapping her arms around herself. "I thought I could fix it myself. I thought if I just got far enough away, made my own choices, my uncle would have to accept it. I was naive." "Maybe," Gabriel said, and some of the hardness left his voice. "But you were also desperate. I understand that, even if I wish you had trusted me enough to tell me." He rubbed a hand over his face, suddenly looking tired. "Catherine, I need you to be completely honest with me now. Is there anything else I should know? Any other arrangements or promises or complications?" She shook her head. "No, just this. Just the arrangement my uncle made with Vernon Walsh. And your mother. Is she really ill, or was that part of the manipulation?" "She is truly ill," Catherine said, and tears spilled over despite her efforts to contain them. "She has a weakness of the heart," the doctors said. "She needs rest and care and medicine that we could not afford after my father died. My uncle promised to pay for everything if I agreed to marry Vernon. That was 3 months ago, before I even wrote my first letter to you. I have been trying to figure out a way to save her without sacrificing myself, and I could not find one." Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, watching her with those steady blue eyes. Finally, he said, "I am not a rich man, Catherine. I have savings, but they are meant for buying land, building a future. I cannot compete with whatever Vernon Walsh can offer financially." "I do not want his money," Catherine said fiercely. "I do not want anything from him. I just want my mother to be cared for, and I want to make my own choices about my life. Is that so much to ask?" "No," Gabriel said gently. "It is not. It is what every person should have the right to expect." He hesitated, then reached out and took her hand carefully as if she might break or disappear. "I meant what I said in my letters. I want a partnership, someone to build a life with. That includes facing problems together, not alone. If you are willing to trust me, truly trust me, maybe we can find a way through this that does not involve you marrying a man you do not want or your mother suffering for your choices." Catherine looked down at their joined hands, his calloused and work-worn, hers smaller and softer despite the hard years she had known. "Why would you help me? I lied to you. I brought trouble to your door. You would be entirely justified in putting me back on the next stage east and forgetting you ever answered my letter." "Maybe," Gabriel said, "but I do not want to. When I got your first letter, when I read about your love of books and your determination to make something of yourself despite the hardships you had faced, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Hope. Like maybe I was not alone in wanting something more than just surviving day to day. Your letters made me think about the future differently, made me excited to plan and dream. So yes, you should have told me about Vernon Walsh and the arrangement. But I also understand why you did not, and I am not ready to give up on what we might build together just because the start was rocky." "You are a better man than I deserve," Catherine said softly. "I doubt that," Gabriel replied with a small smile. "But maybe between us, we can figure out how to do right by each other and your mother too. First, though, we need to understand exactly what the legal situation is. I know a lawyer here in town, fellow named Thomas Wright. He helped the rancher I work for with a land dispute last year. Let me talk to him tomorrow, see what our options are. In the meantime, you stay here at the boarding house where you are safe. I will explain the situation to my boss, Mr. Stratton. He is a fair man and he might have some ideas too." Catherine wanted to protest, to say she could handle her own problems, but the truth was she had tried that already and only made things worse. "Thank you," she said instead, "for not turning me away, for being willing to help." Gabriel squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "We are in this together now. That is what partnership means." He picked up his hat from where he had set it on a side table. "Get some rest. I know the journey must have been exhausting. I will come by tomorrow morning and we can go see the lawyer together." After he left, Catherine climbed the stairs to her small room and sat on the edge of the narrow bed, staring at her trunk without really seeing it. She had come west hoping to escape one trap, only to find she had brought it with her. But somehow the situation felt less hopeless than it had that morning. Gabriel Stone was exactly the man his letters had suggested, honorable and kind, and willing to stand beside her rather than retreat when trouble appeared. She just hoped his faith in finding a solution was not misplaced, because if Vernon Walsh made good on his threats, her mother would pay the price for Catherine's attempt at freedom. The next morning dawned hot and bright, the sun already burning away the cool of night by the time Catherine dressed and went downstairs. Gabriel was waiting in the parlor, looking freshly shaved and slightly less dusty than the day before, though his clothes were still the simple garb of a working cowboy. He smiled when he saw her, a genuine expression that eased some of the tension in her shoulders. "I spoke with Mr. Stratton this morning," he said as they walked toward the lawyer's office. "Told him the whole situation. He said if we need any help, any references or support, he will provide it. He also said you are welcome to come out to the ranch anytime, that his wife would likely enjoy having another woman to talk to. She gets lonely sometimes," he said, "with just ranch hands and cattle for company most days." "That is very kind of him," Catherine said. "And you?" "I know I keep saying thank you, but I truly mean it, Gabriel. You did not have to stand up to Vernon Walsh yesterday. You could have stepped aside and let me face the consequences of my own choices." "I could have," Gabriel agreed, "but that would not have been right. Besides, I meant it when I said we are in this together. I have been alone most of my adult life, making my own way, and it gets tiring. The thought of having a partner, someone to face troubles with and share joys with, that is worth fighting for." Thomas Wright's office was above the general store, reached by a narrow staircase that creaked with each step. The lawyer himself was a man in his mid-30s, with thinning hair and sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He listened carefully as Catherine explained the situation, occasionally asking questions to clarify details. Gabriel sat beside her, a steady presence that helped her get through the most painful parts of the story. "This is a complicated situation," Thomas said when she finished. "Your uncle does have legal authority as your guardian until you marry or reach the age of 25, whichever comes first. And while I personally find the practice of arranging marriages in exchange for debt payment morally questionable, it is not strictly illegal. However, there are several factors working in your favor." He counted them off on his fingers. "First, you are here in Oklahoma territory, and your uncle and Mr. Walsh would need to pursue any legal action through the courts here, not back east. That gives us some geographic advantage in terms of time and resources. Second, while your uncle may have given consent for you to marry Mr. Walsh, he cannot physically compel you to speak the marriage vows. If you refuse, the most Walsh can do is sue for breach of contract and damages. Third, if you marry someone else first, specifically Mr. Stone here, then the entire arrangement becomes moot because you are no longer under your uncle's guardianship." "But what about my mother?" Catherine asked. "Vernon said he would withdraw all support, leave her with no care." "He could do that, could he not?" "Unfortunately, yes," Thomas admitted. "If his payments to your mother's caregivers were contingent on this marriage arrangement, he can stop them at will. However, that is a separate issue from the legal question of whether he can force you to marry him. He cannot. The worst he can do is make life very difficult for you and your family financially." Gabriel leaned forward. How much would it cost to provide for Catherine's mother? Medicine, care, all of it. Thomas looked thoughtful. I would need to know more details about her condition and treatment, but based on what Miss Cole has described, I would estimate perhaps $70 to $80 a month to cover a decent boarding situation with nursing care, medicine, and necessities. Catherine saw Gabriel's face tighten slightly, and she knew he was calculating how that would affect his savings, his plans to buy land. "Gabriel, no," she said quickly. "You cannot give up your dreams for my problems. That is not fair to you." "Life is not fair," Gabriel said quietly. "But we can try to do right by each other. $70 or $80 a month is a lot, but it is not impossible. If I take extra work, breaking horses on the side, maybe pick up some freighting jobs on my days off, I could manage $20 or $25 a month toward it. If you found work here in town, you might be able to contribute another 15 or 20. That is still short, but it is a start." "There is another option," Thomas said carefully. "If you two were to marry, Miss Cole would be legally removed from her uncle's guardianship, which would solve the immediate problem of Mr. Walsh's claims. However, it would also mean taking on the financial burden of her mother's care together. Mr. Stone, you mentioned you are saving to buy your own ranch. This could significantly delay those plans." "Plans can be adjusted," Gabriel said, but Catherine could hear the weight in his voice, the understanding of what he would be sacrificing. "I cannot ask you to do this," Catherine said, turning to face him fully. "We barely know each other. We have exchanged letters and spent a few hours together. Marriage is supposed to be a partnership, not one person rescuing the other at great personal cost." "You are not asking," Gabriel pointed out. "I am offering. And yes, we do not know each other well yet, but I think we could. I think the person I have come to know through letters and now in person is someone I would be proud to call my wife. Unless you have changed your mind about wanting to marry me." Catherine looked at him, this cowboy with kind eyes and a stronger sense of honor than any man she had met back east, and felt something shift in her chest. "I have not changed my mind," she said softly. "But I want you to be certain, Gabriel. This is your life we are talking about, your future. If you do this, if you help me this way, you are giving up your plans for land, at least for a while. That is a lot to sacrifice for someone you barely know." "Then we will get to know each other better," Gabriel said simply. "Starting now, tell me something real, Catherine, something you have never told anyone else." She blinked at the sudden shift in conversation. "What?" "If we are going to be married, truly married as partners, then we should know each other beyond the surface things we wrote in letters. So tell me something real. A fear, a hope, a secret you keep." Catherine thought about deflecting, giving him something safe and inconsequential, but the directness in his gaze stopped her. "I am afraid that I am like my father," she said finally. "He was a good man in many ways, but he made poor decisions, gambled on business ventures that had no hope of success because he wanted quick wealth rather than earned prosperity. And when it all collapsed, he gave up, just stopped fighting. I am afraid that I have that same weakness in me, that when things get truly hard, I will crumble instead of standing firm." Gabriel nodded slowly. "That is a real fear. Thank you for sharing it." He paused, then said, "I am afraid that I will never be more than a hired hand, that all my plans and dreams about owning my own place are just fantasy. My father was a drifter who abandoned my mother when I was small, and I have spent my whole life trying to be different, to build something stable and lasting. But sometimes late at night, I wonder if I am fooling myself, if that instability is in my blood and no amount of hard work will change it." They looked at each other in the lawyer's office, and Catherine felt a connection forming that was deeper than the polite correspondence they had shared, more real than the practical arrangement they had discussed. "We are both afraid of becoming our parents," she said softly. "Maybe that means we will work harder to be different." "Maybe," Gabriel agreed. He looked at Thomas Wright. "How quickly can we arrange a marriage? Is there still a waiting period?" "Under normal circumstances, yes," Thomas said. "But given the circumstances, specifically the threat of Mr. Walsh attempting to force a different arrangement, I believe I could convince Judge Morrison to waive the waiting requirement. You could be married as soon as this afternoon if you both consent." Catherine's heart hammered. This afternoon. In a few hours, she could be married to Gabriel Stone, safe from Vernon Walsh's claims, but also bound to a man she barely knew and saddled with debts that would affect both their futures. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "Catherine," Gabriel said quietly, "this is your decision as much as mine. If you need more time, we will find another way to hold off Walsh while we figure things out. I do not want you to feel forced into this marriage any more than you were forced into the arrangement with him." That was what decided her, that careful distinction, the understanding that even in offering to help, Gabriel was giving her choice. "I do not need more time," she said. "If you are certain, then yes, let us be married today." Thomas Wright smiled, the first genuine expression Catherine had seen on his face. "Then I will go speak with Judge Morrison immediately. Meet me at the courthouse at 3 o'clock. You will need a witness, Mr. Stone." "I will bring my boss, John Stratton," Gabriel said. "And his wife if she is willing." "Catherine, do you have anyone?" "Mrs. Patterson, perhaps," Catherine suggested. "She has been kind in her stern way." They left the lawyer's office in a daze, and Catherine found herself walking beside Gabriel through the dusty streets of Guthrie with her mind whirling. In a few hours, she would be married. The thought was surreal, frightening, and somehow also felt right in a way she had not expected. "We should eat something," Gabriel said practically. "There is a restaurant down the street, nothing fancy, but the food is good and honest. We can talk more, figure out the practical details." Over plates of beef and potatoes, they discussed the immediate future. Gabriel would arrange for his savings to be sent to Catherine's mother's caregivers, at least enough to cover the next few months while they figured out a longer-term solution. Catherine would look for work in town, perhaps teaching if there was a need, or helping at one of the shops. They would live modestly, save every penny possible, and somehow make it work. "What about your ranch?" Catherine asked. "Your dream of your own land." Gabriel was quiet for a moment, pushing potato around his plate with his fork. "Dreams can wait, people cannot. Your mother needs help now, and you need protection from Walsh now. The land will still be there in a few years when we have managed to sort this out and build up savings again." "You are a good man, Gabriel Stone," Catherine said, and meant it with her whole heart. "I am a practical man," he corrected gently, "and I believe in keeping my word. I offered you marriage and partnership, and that is what I intend to provide, complications and all." They arrived at the courthouse at 2:45, and found Thomas Wright already waiting along with a stern-looking older man he introduced as Judge Morrison. John Stratton arrived moments later with his wife Sarah, a pleasant woman in her 40s who immediately drew Catherine aside. "Gabriel is one of the best men I know," she said quietly. "He works harder than anyone on the ranch, never complains, always reliable. You are getting a good husband, Miss Cole. But I suspect he is getting a good wife too, if you were brave enough to come all this way and face your troubles head-on rather than hide from them. You will do well together, I think. Mrs. Patterson had agreed to serve as witness as well, and she stood with her arms crossed, watching the proceedings with her usual stern expression. The ceremony itself was brief and practical. Judge Morrison speaking the traditional words while Catherine and Gabriel stood facing each other in the small courthouse office. When it came time to exchange vows, Gabriel took her hands in his, and his voice was steady and sure. I, Gabriel Stone, take you, Catherine Cole, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. Catherine repeated the words, her voice not quite as steady but no less sincere. And when Judge Morrison pronounced them husband and wife, Gabriel leaned down and kissed her gently, a soft brush of lips that felt like a promise being made. They signed the marriage certificate and Catherine wrote her new name for the first time, Catherine Stone. It looked strange on the paper, foreign and yet somehow also right. She was married. She had a husband. She was legally free from her uncle's guardianship and Vernon Walsh's claims. John Stratton insisted on hosting a small dinner at his ranch to celebrate, and they all rode out together as the afternoon sun started its slow descent toward the horizon. The Stratton Ranch was a sprawling operation with a large main house, several barns and corrals full of horses. Sarah Stratton put together a fine meal despite the short notice, and they ate together while John and Gabriel discussed ranch business, and the two women found common ground talking about books and Eastern cities Sarah remembered from her youth. It was dark by the time Gabriel and Catherine returned to town, riding together in the wagon John had loaned them. The stars overhead were impossibly bright, undimmed by city lights or factory smoke, and Catherine tilted her head back to stare at them in wonder. "It is beautiful here," she said softly. "The letters did not do it justice." "Wait until you see a real Oklahoma sunset," Gabriel said, "or a thunderstorm rolling across the prairie, lightning touching down like fingers of God. This land gets in your blood if you let it." They arrived at the boarding house and the reality of their situation suddenly became very clear. They were married, but they barely knew each other, and the prospect of sharing a room, a bed, felt overwhelming. Gabriel seemed to sense her hesitation. "Catherine, we do not have to rush anything. This marriage is legal regardless of whether we share a bed tonight or a year from now. I know this has all happened very fast, and I do not want you to feel pressured." Relief and something that might have been disappointment warred in Catherine's chest. "Thank you for understanding. It is not that I do not want to eventually. I just need time to adjust to everything that has happened." "We have time," Gabriel assured her. "All the time we need. I will sleep in the stable tonight and find proper lodgings tomorrow. Maybe there is a room to rent above one of the shops, or Mr. Stratton might have space in the bunkhouse until we can figure out something more permanent." But Mrs. Patterson, who had been waiting up despite the late hour, would hear none of it. "Nonsense," she said firmly. "You are married proper and legal, and I will not have people gossiping that the marriage was not real because the groom spent the wedding night in a stable. I have a larger room on the 3rd floor that will suit a married couple. You can move your things there, Mr. Stone, and maintain propriety while also maintaining appearances." The 3rd floor room was larger than Catherine's had been, with a proper double bed, and even a small sitting area with 2 chairs by the window. Gabriel brought up his few possessions, a worn saddlebag and a trunk not much larger than Catherine's, and they arranged themselves awkwardly in the space that was now somehow both theirs and not. "I will sleep in the chair," Gabriel offered, but Catherine shook her head. "The bed is large enough for 2 people to sleep without touching. We are adults. We can manage." She hesitated, then added, "Unless you would prefer the chair." "I would prefer not to wake up with a cramped back," Gabriel admitted. "But Catherine, I meant what I said. This goes at whatever pace you are comfortable with. Nothing happens that you do not want to happen." They prepared for bed with careful modesty, changing in turns while the other faced the wall. When Catherine finally climbed under the covers, Gabriel stayed on his side, leaving a clear space between them. The room was dark except for moonlight streaming through the window, and Catherine could hear his breathing, steady and calm. "Gabriel," she whispered after a while. "Yes." "Tell me about your ranch. The one you want to build someday. What does it look like in your mind?" He was quiet for a moment, and she wondered if he would refuse to talk about the dream he was postponing for her sake. But then his voice came through the darkness, soft and thoughtful. "It is not huge, maybe 160 acres to start. Good grazing land with a creek running through it for water. I would build the house on a rise where you can see for miles in every direction, watch the weather coming and the sun going down. Nothing fancy at first, maybe just 3 or 4 rooms, but solid, built to last. There would be a good barn, corrals for the horses, and eventually cattle, though I might start with horses first since I know them better." "It sounds wonderful," Catherine said honestly. "We will get there, Gabriel. Maybe it will take longer than you planned, but we will get there." "Maybe," he agreed. "But even if we do not, even if plans change, I think I will be all right. Because I realized something today. The dream was never really about the land itself. It was about building something that mattered, something I could be proud of, and maybe that can take different forms than I originally imagined." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "I will do everything I can to help us get there. I will work hard, save every penny, and I will make this partnership mean something real." "I know you will," Gabriel said quietly. And somehow, in the darkness of that rented room in a frontier town, Catherine believed it too. The next few days passed in a strange blur of adjustment and anxiety. Catherine found work quickly, hired by the general store to help with bookkeeping and serving customers. The pay was modest but steady, and she threw herself into the work with determination. Gabriel continued his job at the Stratton Ranch, but began taking additional work in the evenings and on his days off, breaking horses for other ranchers and farmers willing to pay for his skill. Vernon Walsh did not appear again, but his presence hung over them like a storm cloud waiting to break. Thomas Wright reported that Walsh had consulted with him about legal options, and upon learning that Catherine was now married, had departed for Guthrie with ominous promises about pursuing other remedies. Catherine worried constantly about her mother, wondering if Walsh had made good on his threat to withdraw support. Then, 2 weeks after the wedding, a letter arrived from Philadelphia. Catherine opened it with shaking hands while Gabriel watched from across their room. It was from a neighbor woman who sometimes looked in on Catherine's mother, and the contents made Catherine's knees go weak with relief. "My uncle is still paying for her care," she read aloud. Apparently, Walsh demanded he continue the payments as part of their business arrangement, regardless of what happened with me. "The neighbor says my mother is doing well, asking after me, and the caregivers are being paid regularly." Gabriel crossed the room and pulled her into a hug, the first real embrace they had shared since their wedding kiss. Catherine leaned into him, feeling the solid strength of his body, the steady beat of his heart. "It is good news," he said. "It means we have breathing room, time to build up our own resources before we need to take over the payments ourselves." "Unless my uncle decides to stop paying out of spite," Catherine said, but she let herself enjoy the relief for the moment. "Then we will deal with it," Gabriel said simply. Together. As weeks turned into months, Catherine and Gabriel began to build something real between them. They learned each other's habits and preferences, the small details that made up a life together. Gabriel woke before dawn every morning, moving quietly so as not to disturb her, but Catherine usually woke anyway, watching him dress in the gray pre-dawn light. She learned that he took his coffee black and preferred his eggs scrambled, that he had a habit of humming tunelessly when he thought no one was listening, and that he sometimes woke from nightmares he would not discuss, but that left him shaken and withdrawn. Gabriel learned that Catherine read voraciously, borrowing books from anyone who would lend them, and that she had a sharp wit that emerged once she felt comfortable enough to let it show. He discovered that she was meticulous about money, tracking every penny they spent and saved in a small ledger, and that she missed her mother with an ache that sometimes made her cry when she thought he was asleep. They also learned to trust each other in ways that went beyond the practical. Gabriel began confiding in Catherine about his dreams and fears, his frustrations with work and his hopes for the future. Catherine found herself sharing stories from her childhood, both the good memories and the painful ones, trusting him to understand the complicated feelings she had about her family. Physical affection grew slowly between them, tentative but genuine. Gabriel would take her hand as they walked together, or rest his hand on the small of her back when they navigated crowded sidewalks. Catherine would lean against him when they sat together in the evenings, reading while he worked on mending tack or carving small figures from scraps of wood. They kissed goodnight, gentle touches that gradually grew longer, deeper, more meaningful. 3 months after their wedding, everything changed. Catherine was working at the general store when Vernon Walsh walked through the door. She froze, her hand clenching around the bolt of fabric she had been measuring for a customer. "Miss Cole," he said, then corrected himself with a thin smile. "I apologize, Mrs. Stone now, I believe. Mr. Walsh." Catherine kept her voice level, though her heart hammered. "I am surprised to see you still in Oklahoma territory." "I have been handling some business matters in Oklahoma City," he said smoothly. "I thought I would stop by Guthrie on my way back east to inform you personally of the situation regarding your mother." Catherine felt ice form in her stomach. "What situation?" "Your uncle has decided that continuing to pay for her care while you openly defy his wishes is not a wise use of resources," Vernon said. "He will be withdrawing all financial support as of the end of this month. I thought you should know, so you can make appropriate arrangements." "You mean so we have time to panic and perhaps reconsider our position," Catherine said, anger overriding fear for a moment. Vernon smiled, and it did not reach his eyes. "I mean so your mother does not suffer unduly when the money stops. She is not responsible for your poor decisions, after all. It would be a shame if she ended up in a charity ward or worse simply because you refused to honor an agreement." "That agreement was made without my consent," Catherine said. "I am not property to be traded between men for business advantages." "Legally, that is debatable," Vernon replied. "But I did not come here to argue law with you, Mrs. Stone. I came to make you an offer. Your husband, I understand, is a cowboy with dreams of owning his own ranch. Those are expensive dreams, particularly when burdened with the care of an invalid mother-in-law. I am prepared to resume all payments for your mother's care, provide an additional sum for her comfort, and even assist your husband in purchasing land, if you agree to annul this hasty marriage and fulfill your original obligation." Catherine stared at him. "You cannot be serious." "I am entirely serious. Your uncle was quite angry when he learned of your marriage, but he is also a practical man. He believes that once you realize the full extent of the financial burden you have taken on, you will see reason. All I require is that you honor the agreement that was made. In exchange, your mother receives excellent care for the rest of her life, and your current husband receives enough money to purchase the ranch he dreams of. Everyone benefits. Except me, who would be married to a man I do not love and bound to a life I never chose," Catherine said. Vernon shrugged. Love is a luxury, Mrs. Stone. Security is a necessity. You might consider which is more important in the long run. He left before Catherine could respond, and she stood behind the counter shaking with anger and fear in equal measure. The store owner, Mr. Davis, who had been pointedly organizing stock in the far corner during the exchange, came over and patted her arm awkwardly. "That man is trouble," he said. "You watch yourself, Mrs. Stone. Men like that do not take no for an answer gracefully." Catherine nodded mutely and returned to her work, but her mind was whirling. The end of the month was only 2 weeks away. If her uncle truly withdrew support for her mother, she and Gabriel would need to come up with $70 to $80 a month immediately. Between them, they were barely earning that much in total, let alone enough to cover the care and still pay for their own lodging and food. The numbers simply did not add up. That evening she told Gabriel what had happened. He listened in silence, his face growing increasingly grim. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "We will manage," he said finally, but she could hear the uncertainty underneath. "How?" Catherine asked bluntly. "Gabriel, we cannot earn enough to cover her care and support ourselves, not yet. Maybe in time if we both found better paying work, but not immediately, and my mother cannot wait while we figure it out." "Then I will sell my savings," Gabriel said. "The money I had set aside for land. It is not much, maybe $200, but it would cover several months of care while we find a better solution." "No," Catherine said firmly. "That is your dream, your future. I will not let you sacrifice it for my mother." "She is my mother now too," Gabriel pointed out. "We are married. Your family is my family." "But it is not fair, Catherine." He took her hands, his calloused fingers gentle around hers. "Nothing about this situation has been fair from the beginning. Your father died, your uncle manipulated you, Walsh tried to buy you like property. We are doing the best we can with bad circumstances. And right now, the best we can do is use the money I have saved to take care of your mother while we figure out next steps. It is not forever, just enough to bridge the gap." Catherine felt tears spill over and Gabriel pulled her into his arms, holding her while she cried against his chest. "I hate this," she whispered. "I hate that your kindness costs you so much. I hate that my choices put you in this position." "I made my own choice," Gabriel reminded her. "I chose to marry you knowing the situation. I chose to be your partner, and partners share burdens. This is what that means." They arranged for Gabriel's savings to be transferred to the caregivers in Philadelphia, with instructions that it was to be used for Catherine's mother and strict accounting kept of every penny. It would cover 4 months of care, maybe 5 if they were careful. In that time, they would need to find a way to increase their income significantly, or accept Vernon Walsh's offer. The thought of that offer haunted Catherine. Every morning when she woke beside Gabriel, every evening when they sat together after work, she found herself wondering if she was being selfish. Walsh had offered security for her mother and money for Gabriel to pursue his dreams. All it would cost was her freedom and happiness. Was that not a reasonable trade? But when she looked at Gabriel, when she remembered the way he had stood up to Walsh that first day, the way he had carefully courted her trust and affection without ever pushing or demanding, she knew she could not do it. She had found something real with him, something worth fighting for. Gabriel, meanwhile, threw himself into finding solutions. He took every extra job he could find, working dawn to well past dusk most days. He broke horses for neighboring ranches, hauled freight, helped with barn raisings and fence repairs. John Stratton, seeing his determination, gave him a raise and additional responsibilities at the ranch. Catherine likewise increased her hours at the general store, taking on bookkeeping for other businesses in town during her limited free time. They rarely saw each other anymore, passing like ships in the night, both exhausted from constant work. When they did have moments together, they were too tired for meaningful conversation. Catherine watched Gabriel grow leaner and more worn, and knew she looked much the same. This was not sustainable, but neither of them knew what else to do. It was Sarah Stratton who finally intervened. She arrived at the boarding house one Sunday afternoon, the one day both Catherine and Gabriel had at least partially free, and found them sleeping in their room, too exhausted to even properly enjoy their day of rest. "This cannot continue," she declared, waking them both with her firm knock. "You are working yourselves to death, and for what? You are earning money, but you are not living." "We do not have much choice," Catherine said wearily. "My mother needs care, and it costs money we do not have." "Then we need to think more creatively," Sarah said. She sat down in one of their chairs, uninvited but welcome. "Tell me everything, the whole situation, all the details." So they did, explaining about the debts, the arrangement with Walsh, the payments for Catherine's mother, and their desperate attempts to cover the costs themselves. Sarah listened carefully, occasionally asking questions to clarify details. "Your mother," she said finally. "Could she travel? Is she well enough to make a journey west?" Catherine blinked. "I suppose so, with proper care during the trip. But why?" "Because care in Oklahoma Territory is considerably less expensive than in Philadelphia," Sarah said. "And if she were here, you could oversee her care directly rather than paying others to do so. We have a small cabin on our property, used to house our ranch hands, but currently empty since we are between hires. You could bring your mother there, hire a local woman to help with her care during the days, and Catherine could manage evenings and nights. The total cost would be perhaps $30 a month instead of $70 or $80. Gabriel sat up straighter. "That would be manageable. Between us, we could cover that and still have money left for savings." "But the journey," Catherine said. "How could we afford to bring her west?" "That is where creativity comes in," Sarah said with a small smile. "My brother manages a freight company that runs regular routes between Kansas City and Oklahoma. Your mother could travel in one of their passenger cars for a reduced rate. And I happen to know a doctor in Oklahoma City who specializes in heart conditions and is always looking for interesting cases to study. He might be willing to provide reduced-cost care in exchange for the opportunity to treat and monitor her condition." It took a week to arrange everything, a flurry of letters and telegrams coordinating the complicated logistics. But at the end of that week, Catherine received word that her mother would arrive in Guthrie in 3 weeks' time, traveling with a nurse who was coincidentally relocating to Oklahoma herself. The doctor in Oklahoma City had agreed to serve as consulting physician for minimal fees, intrigued by the case description Catherine had provided. And the cabin on the Stratton Ranch was being cleaned and prepared for its new occupant. Catherine cried when she read the final confirmation letter, overwhelmed with relief and gratitude. Gabriel held her, and for the first time in weeks, she felt like they might actually be able to manage this impossible situation. "I do not know how to thank Sarah," she said, "or you, or anyone who has helped us. We will thank them by building good lives," Gabriel said, "by making this work and proving that kindness and community matter more than money and contracts." The day Catherine's mother arrived was one of nervous anticipation. Catherine waited at the depot, gripping Gabriel's hand, terrified of what condition her mother might be in after the long journey. When the stage finally arrived and the door opened, a middle-aged woman in a nurse's uniform helped another woman down the steps, and Catherine felt her breath catch. Her mother looked older than Catherine remembered, thinner and more frail, but her eyes were bright and alert. "Catherine," she said, and her voice was the same as it had always been, warm and full of love. "My dear girl." They embraced carefully, Catherine mindful of her mother's fragility, and when they parted, her mother looked past her to where Gabriel stood. "And this must be your husband, Gabriel Stone, who married my daughter and took on all her troubles along with her. Come here, young man, and let me look at you properly." Gabriel approached, and to Catherine's surprise, her mother took his hands and studied his face intently. "You have kind eyes," she said finally, "and an honest face. Catherine chose well, I think." "I am the one who chose well," Gabriel said quietly. "Your daughter is the bravest person I know." The cabin on the Stratton Ranch was small but comfortable, with a bedroom for Catherine's mother, a main room with a kitchen area, and a sleeping loft above. The ranch hands' quarters were in a bunkhouse on the other side of the property, so there was privacy and quiet. Catherine and Gabriel moved their few possessions from the boarding house, and for the first time since their marriage, they had something that felt like a real home. Catherine's mother, whose name was Margaret, adapted to frontier life with surprising grace. A local widow named Esther agreed to come during the days to help with cooking and light housekeeping, providing companionship along with practical assistance. The doctor from Oklahoma City made monthly visits, adjusting medications and providing advice that significantly improved Margaret's condition. Within a few weeks, she had more color in her cheeks and more energy than Catherine had seen in over a year. "The air here agrees with me," Margaret said one evening as they sat together on the cabin's small porch, watching the sun set in brilliant streaks of orange and purple across the wide prairie sky. "Or perhaps it is seeing you happy, my dear. You smile more than you did back home." "I am happy," Catherine realized and meant it. The work was still hard and the money still tight, but they were managing, and more than that, they were building something together. She and Gabriel had fallen into a comfortable partnership, sharing responsibilities and making decisions together. And slowly, carefully, their relationship had deepened into something beyond practical arrangement or even friendship. It happened gradually, then all at once. A lingering touch while passing each other in the cabin's small kitchen. Gabriel's hand finding hers in the darkness as they lay side by side in the sleeping loft. Kisses that grew longer, deeper, full of a hunger they had both been carefully suppressing. One night, 4 months after Margaret's arrival, Catherine turned in Gabriel's arms and whispered, "I want this to be a real marriage, completely real in every way." Gabriel's response was to kiss her with a tenderness that made her heart ache, and their wedding night, delayed by months of circumstances and caution, finally happened in the quiet darkness of their loft, with the Oklahoma wind singing through the prairie grass outside. Afterward, lying tangled together in the narrow bed, Catherine felt Gabriel trace patterns on her shoulder with gentle fingers. "I love you," he said quietly. "I think I have for a while now, but I did not know if you felt the same, if we could have that kind of marriage or if it would always be just practical partnership." "I love you too," Catherine said, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. This man who had stood beside her, who had sacrificed his dreams to protect hers, who worked himself to exhaustion and still found ways to make her smile. This was the partner she had hoped for when she first wrote her letter to a cowboy in Oklahoma Territory. "You are the best choice I ever made, Gabriel Stone." Life settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable and even joyful. Catherine continued working at the general store while also helping care for her mother. Gabriel worked at the Stratton Ranch and took occasional extra jobs, but no longer pushed himself to exhaustion. They saved what they could, slowly building back the reserves that had been depleted. Margaret grew stronger, able to take short walks and even help with simple tasks around the cabin. The doctor from Oklahoma City declared himself pleased with her progress and reduced his visits to quarterly checkups. Then, one spring morning nearly a year after their wedding, Vernon Walsh appeared at the Stratton Ranch. John Stratton himself came to the cabin to inform them, his face grave. "He is at the main house, demanding to see Catherine," John said. "I told him I would need to check if she was willing to meet with him, but he seems determined. He has some legal papers with him." Gabriel's jaw tightened, but Catherine put a hand on his arm. "I will see him. Whatever he has to say, I would rather face it directly than wonder and worry." They went together to the main house, where Vernon Walsh waited in the parlor, looking out of place in his expensive suit among the practical furnishings. He turned when they entered, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Stone," he said formally, "thank you for agreeing to see me." "I do not recall agreeing," Catherine said, "but I am here. What do you want, Mr. Walsh?" He reached into his coat and withdrew a sheaf of papers. "I want to present you with these documents. The first is a legal release from any and all claims related to the marriage arrangement your uncle made on your behalf. I am formally withdrawing any legal action or threats related to that agreement." Catherine stared at him, uncomprehending. "Why?" Vernon Walsh looked uncomfortable, perhaps the first genuine emotion Catherine had ever seen on his face. "Because your uncle is dead. He passed away 2 months ago from an apoplexy. In settling his estate, I discovered that he had been embezzling from our joint business ventures for several years, covering his losses by making increasingly risky arrangements, including the one involving you and your mother. The debts he claimed to pay on your behalf were largely fabricated. Your father's actual debts were settled within months of his death through the sale of his business assets." The room seemed to tilt around Catherine. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that your uncle lied to you. He manipulated you into agreeing to marry me as part of a business deal that had nothing to do with your mother's care or your father's debts. He simply needed a way to bind me to the partnership, and offering his niece in marriage was his chosen method. I did not know the extent of his deception until after his death, when I reviewed his personal papers." Vernon paused, then added stiffly, "I am not a good man, Mrs. Stone, but I am not so vile as to coerce a woman into marriage under entirely false pretenses. What your uncle did was unconscionable, and I will not be party to it now that I understand the full truth." Gabriel's hand found Catherine's, steadying her. "What about Margaret's care? Was that also fabricated?" "No, that was real. Your uncle did arrange and pay for her care, though the costs were considerably less than he led Catherine to believe. He was pocketing the difference." Vernon held out another paper. "This is a bank draft for the amount he embezzled through that scheme, approximately $1,800. It should have gone to Margaret's care. I am returning it to you now." Catherine took the paper with numb fingers, staring at the amount written there. $1,800, enough to buy Gabriel's land, enough to build their future. "I do not understand. Why are you doing this?" "Because I am trying to salvage what remains of my business reputation after your uncle's duplicity came to light," Vernon said bluntly. "And because, in the course of settling the estate, I became acquainted with a widow in Philadelphia, a woman of substance and intelligence who has agreed to marry me for reasons that have nothing to do with business arrangements or family pressure. I find that I prefer that situation to the alternative." He picked up his hat from the side table. "I have no further business in Oklahoma territory. I wish you well, Mrs. Stone, though I suspect you are doing quite well without my wishes." He left without waiting for a response, and Catherine stood holding the bank draft, trying to process everything that had just been said. Gabriel pulled her into his arms and she leaned against him, feeling dazed. "It is over," he said quietly. "The threat, the debt, all of it. "You are free, Catherine, truly free." She looked up at him, this man she had come to love so deeply, and felt tears spill over. "We are free," she corrected. "We can buy your land now, Gabriel. We can build the ranch you have always dreamed of." But Gabriel shook his head slowly, a smile playing at his lips. "Our ranch, our dream. We build it together and we decide together what it looks like. That is what partnership means, remember." They spent the next several months planning carefully, visiting various properties for sale in the area, evaluating land and water and access. Finally, they found it. 160 acres about 5 miles from the Stratton Ranch, with rolling prairie, a good creek, and a rise perfect for building. They purchased it in both their names, Catherine Cole Stone and Gabriel Stone, equal partners in the venture. Building the house and barn took months of hard work, with help from John Stratton and other neighboring ranchers who turned out for barn raisings and house construction. Margaret supervised from a comfortable chair in the shade, calling out encouragement, and occasionally offering suggestions that were surprisingly practical. Esther continued to help with her care, and the two women had become close friends, spending their days planning gardens and discussing the vegetables and herbs they would plant. The house Gabriel built was exactly as he had described it in that first conversation in the dark of their boarding house room. Solid, well-crafted, positioned on a rise with views for miles in every direction. It had 4 rooms, a luxury compared to the cabin, with a proper bedroom for Catherine and Gabriel, a room for Margaret, a main living area with a stone fireplace, and even a small room Gabriel said could be a study or sewing room or whatever Catherine wanted it to be. They moved in on a brilliant October day in 1895, 2 years after Catherine had first arrived in Guthrie on that dusty stage. As they stood on the porch of their new home, looking out over land that was theirs, worked for and dreamed about and built together, Catherine felt Gabriel's arm come around her waist. "We did it," he said quietly. "We actually did it." "We did," Catherine agreed, leaning into him. "It took longer and was harder than either of us expected, but we got here." "I do not regret any of it," Gabriel said. "Not the hard work or the sacrifices or the fear and uncertainty, because it brought us here to this moment, and I would not trade that for anything." Catherine turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had become her partner in the truest sense of the word. "Were you asked or told?" she said softly, echoing the question that had changed everything that day in the boarding house parlor. Gabriel's smile was slow and warm. "I was asked, by every letter you wrote and every choice you made. And I keep choosing you, Catherine Stone, every single day." She kissed him then, there on the porch of their new home with the Oklahoma wind singing around them and the future stretching wide and open as the prairie sky. Inside the house, she could hear her mother and Esther laughing together, arranging furniture and planning where to hang curtains. This was what she had hoped for when she fled west, what she had dreamed of in her most optimistic moments. A home built on honesty and partnership, love earned through shared struggles, and a future they would write together. As the months became years, the ranch flourished. Gabriel proved as skilled at ranching as he had been at breaking horses, and Catherine turned out to have a knack for managing the business side of the operation. They started with horses, as Gabriel had planned, buying young stock and training them for sale. Word spread about the quality of their animals, and soon they had buyers coming from as far as Kansas City. Margaret continued to improve, her heart condition stabilizing to the point where the doctor declared her remarkably healthy for a woman of her age and history. She took over the kitchen garden, coaxing vegetables and herbs from the Oklahoma soil with patient determination. Esther moved into a small cottage they built on the property, becoming as much family as employee. In the spring of 1897, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure, and Gabriel was impossibly gentle with her, treating her like she might break. She had to remind him repeatedly that she was growing a baby, not suffering from some terrible disease, and that she was perfectly capable of continuing her work until much closer to the birth. Their son was born in late November, during the first cold snap of early winter, with her mother and Esther attending her and Gabriel pacing anxiously outside until they finally let him in. He held the baby with such careful reverence that Catherine felt her heart might burst. "What should we call him?" she asked, exhausted and elated in the aftermath of labor. Gabriel looked down at the tiny face, one finger stroking the baby's impossibly soft cheek. "I was thinking maybe James, after my grandfather. He was a good man, a honest man. I would like our son to carry that name." "James Stone," Catherine said, trying it out. "I like it, but his middle name should be after my father. Despite everything that happened, he loved me in his way, and I want our son to carry a piece of that." "James Thomas Stone," Gabriel said and smiled. "Perfect." Parenthood changed them in ways both expected and surprising. They had less time for each other, their attention consumed by the endless needs of an infant. But watching Gabriel with their son, seeing the tenderness and patience he showed, made Catherine fall in love with him all over again in new ways. And when James finally slept, when they had brief moments alone in the darkness of their bedroom, their love felt deeper and richer for having been tested and proven through so much. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, born on a warm summer evening with considerably less drama than her brother's birth. They named her Rose Margaret, for the wild prairie roses that bloomed around their property, and for Catherine's mother, who cried when she heard. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. They added cattle to their operations, built additional corrals and a larger barn. Gabriel hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased work, young men from town who were eager to learn the trade. Catherine managed the books and correspondence, handling sales and purchases with a shrewd business sense that surprised even her. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Gabriel took Catherine riding out to the farthest corner of their property, to a spot where the creek widened into a small pool surrounded by cottonwood trees. It was one of Catherine's favorite places, peaceful and sheltered, and they often came here when they needed to escape the noise and demands of the ranch for a few hours. "I have been thinking," Gabriel said as they sat together on the bank, watching the water ripple past, "about that first day you arrived, and how terrified I was that you would take one look at me and get right back on the stage east." Catherine laughed. "I was equally terrified you would be disappointed. Your letters made you sound wonderful, and I was so afraid the reality would not live up to the dream." "I think the reality exceeded both our dreams," Gabriel said quietly. "I wanted a partner, someone to build a life with, and I got that, but I also got so much more. I got love, real and deep and tested by fire. I got a family, not just you but Margaret and now our children. I got a home in every sense of the word, and I got proof that sometimes the hardest roads lead to the best destinations." "You are getting philosophical in your old age," Catherine teased, though she was 27 and he was 29, hardly old by any measure. "I am getting grateful," Gabriel corrected. "For you, for this life, for every choice that led us here, including the hard ones." Catherine leaned against him, feeling his arm come around her shoulders in the gesture that had become so familiar and so dear. "I am grateful, too. For your courage in standing up to Vernon Walsh, for your willingness to sacrifice your dreams for my mother, for the way you have loved me even when I did not make it easy." "You have always been easy to love," Gabriel said softly. "From the very first letter, you have been exactly who I hoped to find." They sat together in companionable silence, watching the light fade from the sky and the first stars appear. In the distance, they could hear the cattle lowing and the horses nickering in the corrals. Closer, the sound of their children's laughter drifted from the house where Margaret was watching them. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you had not asked me that question?" Catherine said after a while. "If you had just stepped aside and let Walsh take me." "Never," Gabriel said firmly. "Because I knew from your letters, from that very first conversation, that you were someone who deserved to make your own choices. Asking if you had been asked or told, that was not me being noble or heroic. That was me seeing you, truly seeing you and recognizing that your agency mattered, that you mattered." "It was both noble and heroic," Catherine insisted, "and it changed everything." They returned to the house as full darkness fell, walking their horses slowly through the comfortable evening. Inside, Margaret had gotten both children fed and into their night clothes, and was reading them a story in the living room. She looked up when Catherine and Gabriel entered and smiled. "There you are. These two have been asking for you." James, now 4 years old, ran to Gabriel, who scooped him up with easy affection. Rose, too and fiercely independent, climbed into Catherine's lap for the nightly ritual of kisses and cuddles before bed. Later, after the children were asleep and Margaret had retired to her room, Catherine and Gabriel stood together on their porch, looking out at the land they had built. The moon was rising, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. "I have something to tell you," Catherine said softly. "I was going to wait, but I do not want to keep secrets from you ever again, even happy ones." Gabriel turned to look at her, his expression curious and slightly concerned. "What is it?" "I am pregnant again," Catherine said. "About 3 months along, I think." I wanted to be certain before I said anything. Gabriel's face transformed with joy and he pulled her into a careful embrace. "That is wonderful. How are you feeling?" "Tired, but good. Happy." She paused, then added, "I keep thinking about how different this is from when I first came here. I was so lost, so desperate and afraid, and now look at us. We have a home, a family, a life we built together from nothing but hope and hard work." "And love," Gabriel added. "Do not forget love." "Never," Catherine promised. She looked up at the stars, the same stars that had seemed so bright and strange that first night in Guthrie, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was home. This man beside her, these children sleeping in the house behind them, this land they worked and nurtured, this was everything she had hoped for and more. The baby arrived the following spring, another boy they named Daniel after Gabriel's late brother. He was healthy and loud and demanding, and Catherine found herself utterly exhausted and completely happy in equal measure. Gabriel was impossibly patient, taking the night feedings when he could so Catherine could rest, playing with James and Rose to give her space to care for the baby. Margaret proved invaluable, her experience helping to calm Catherine's new mother anxieties. "You worry too much," she said one afternoon as Catherine fretted over Daniel's feeding schedule. "Babies are tougher than they look, and you are doing just fine." "I want to do better than fine," Catherine said. "I want to be the kind of mother you were to me, steady and loving and always there." "You are," Margaret assured her. "You are exactly the mother your children need, just as Gabriel is exactly the father they need. Trust yourself, my dear." As Daniel grew from infant to toddler, the ranch operations continued to expand. Gabriel had earned a reputation as one of the best horse trainers in the territory, and buyers came from as far as Texas to purchase his stock. Catherine managed the increasingly complex business side, hiring an assistant to help with the bookkeeping and correspondence that had become too much for one person to handle efficiently. They prospered, not in the flashy wealth of people like Vernon Walsh, but in the steady accumulation of success built on skill and hard work. They added to their land holdings, purchasing another 80 acres adjacent to their original property. They improved the house, adding on rooms and modernizing the kitchen. They hired more help, becoming employers and mentors to young men learning the ranching trade. But more than the material success, what Catherine treasured was the life they had created together. The quiet mornings drinking coffee on the porch before the children woke. The evenings reading together in front of the fire while the wind howled outside. The way Gabriel still took her hand when they walked, the way he looked at her like she was the most important person in his world. On a warm September evening in 1903, 10 years after Catherine had first arrived in Guthrie, they hosted a gathering at the ranch. John and Sarah Stratton came, along with other neighboring ranchers and their families, townsfolk from Guthrie, and friends they had made over the years. It was ostensibly a celebration of the ranch's 10th anniversary, but really it was a celebration of community and connection. All the relationships that had supported them through hard times and good. As the party wound down and guests began to depart, Catherine found herself standing with Sarah Stratton, watching the children play in the last light of sunset. "You have built something remarkable here," Sarah said quietly. "Not just the ranch, though that is impressive enough. But the life, the family, the way you and Gabriel work together. It is everything a partnership should be." "We have had a lot of help," Catherine said. "You and John especially. I do not think we would have made it without your kindness and support." "You would have found a way," Sarah said confidently. "You and Gabriel are both fighters, though you fight with determination and hard work rather than violence. That kind of strength builds things that last." After the last guests had left and the children were in bed, Catherine and Gabriel sat together on their porch, tired but content. The ranch spread out before them, barns and corrals and pastures they had built and tended, land they had transformed through sweat and vision. "Do you ever miss the East?" Gabriel asked. "The city, the life you knew before." Catherine considered the question carefully. "Sometimes I miss my father before everything went wrong, and there are moments when I miss having a library close by or being able to attend a concert or play. But miss that life? No. This is home, Gabriel. This land, this house, you and the children and my mother, this is where I belong." "I am glad," Gabriel said simply, "because I cannot imagine this life without you, not just the ranch and the success, but the everyday moments. Waking up beside you, watching you with our children, working together on problems and celebrating victories together. You are my partner in every sense of the word, Catherine, and I love you more with each passing year." Catherine leaned into him, feeling his arm come around her in the gesture that never failed to make her feel safe and cherished. "I love you too. You took a terrified woman fleeing a bad situation and gave her the space to become who she was meant to be. You stood beside me, not in front of me trying to direct and control, but beside me as an equal. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged one by one overhead, the same stars that had witnessed the beginning of their story and would witness whatever came next. The future stretched out before them, unknown but no longer frightening. They would face it together, as they had faced everything since that day in the boarding house parlor when Gabriel had asked a simple question that changed both their lives. Years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working with the horses like his father. Rose proved to be fiercely independent and curious, constantly asking questions and exploring every corner of the ranch. Daniel was the charmer, able to coax smiles even from the stern ranch hands. Margaret lived to see all three of her grandchildren grow into young adults, passing away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 68, surrounded by family in the home Catherine and Gabriel had built. Her death was grief but also grace, a life well lived and an ending without suffering. Gabriel's hair started to show silver at the temples, and Catherine found her own dark hair threaded with white. They wore their age comfortably, badges of lives fully lived. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management, and they earned reputations as fair employers and honest dealers. But more than any material success, what they treasured was each other and the family they had created. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Gabriel took Catherine back to that spot by the creek where they had sat on their 5th anniversary, and they reminisced about all the years between. "I still remember the first time I saw you," Gabriel said. Standing by the stage, looking terrified and determined in equal measure. "I thought you were the bravest person I had ever met, coming all this way to marry a stranger based on letters and hope." "I was terrified," Catherine admitted. "Of you, of the situation, of my own choices. But you made it easy to be brave. You stood beside me when you could have walked away, and you have been standing beside me ever since." "There is nowhere else I would rather be," Gabriel said simply, "than right here beside you, building this life together." They kissed in the dappled shade of the cottonwoods, two people who had found each other across distance and circumstance, who had chosen each other every day for 20 years, who had built something that would last long after they were gone. As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in brilliant streaks of gold and crimson, Catherine thought about that younger version of herself who had arrived in Guthrie with a secret and a desperate hope. She wished she could tell that frightened girl that everything would work out, that the cowboy waiting at the depot would be everything she hoped for and more, that the question were you asked or told would change everything. But maybe that girl had known, somewhere deep inside. Maybe that was why she had written those first letters, why she had chosen hope over resignation, partnership over obligation. Maybe she had always known that real love, real partnership, was worth fighting for. The ranch would pass to their children someday, and they would build their own lives on the foundation Catherine and Gabriel had created. But for now, in this moment, it was theirs, a testament to what two people could build when they chose each other freely, loved each other deeply, and worked side by side toward a shared dream. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Catherine looked at the man beside her, her husband and partner and best friend, and felt nothing but gratitude for that dusty afternoon in July when Gabriel Stone had asked if she had been given a choice. She had chosen him then, and she chose him still, every single day in all the small moments and large decisions that made up their life together. This was their story, written in hard work and hope, in sacrifice and joy, in a simple question that recognized her humanity and a lifetime of answers that proved what real partnership could be. And as the Oklahoma stars began to emerge in the deepening dusk, Catherine knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a single moment of the journey that had brought them here, to this place, to this life, to each other.